think we ought to pray first.
Sure.
Well, Father, thank you for this privilege to spend this time with David, for the bond of the Spirit that we already know. We thank you for that. We just ask that you would give us clear minds and clear answers so that what we do can be of use in your kingdom and encourage others who are on the journey. Thank you for this time. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So you got to figure out, because this is like a new experience for both of us, is to whether you feel like you want to talk to me or talk to the camera. But sometimes the camera's got a friendlier face than I do. But anyway, I'm here with David Barton. We met a couple, 3 years ago when I was making my round of churches in the Charleston area to try to see what God was doing here. And he was one of the young church planters that I dropped in on their services. They were meeting at an elementary school back then. And I've sort of, we've played some racquetball, or one of us played, one of us sweated and the other played. I spotted him 40 years and he still beat me. So anyway, grateful for that. But I wanted to come back and to talk to David because of the journey that he's been on, in hopes that it can be an encouragement to others. So begin just sort of introductory stuff. So tell a little bit about where you're from and where you grew up, your how you met the Lord. So let's just start there.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me do this with you. So I was born in a Christian family. Mom and Dad loved the Lord, and we were that type of family that we were in the church all the time. Dad was chairman of the deacons, Mom was in the choir, they ran Awana, you name it, we were there. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Tuesday night, whatever the occasion called for, we were there and involved. And we could walk to church, it was that close. And I came to know the Lord whenever I was at the age of 9. But you know how that goes. I think every child that's saved and baptized at a young age, they have questions or doubts or don't understand everything. And so I may not have understood what I was doing at the time, but the Lord knew what he was doing. And, throughout the years, I had several more epiphanies. Light bulbs would go off, and I'd understand the gospel a little bit more each time. And was eventually, brought up in a student ministry by a good student pastor, faithful student pastor. And I would say that he did the best that he could in discipling me and raising me up. And I was probably about 16 years old whenever I knew that God was calling me into a ministry. Now, at 16 years old, I thought my ambition was to be a student pastor. And so that's the direction I started out. Whenever I was starting out in college, my whole purpose was to get a degree, be a teacher, and be a student pastor on the side. And started out in that direction, and even got involved and started doing some student ministry at a fairly large church, and realized I hated it. I didn't like students. I guess I'll lock in where you're in charge of somewhere near 90 middle school boys for a night or two will do that to you. And I just realized it wasn't for me. I didn't have the patience for it. The ones that I had the best relationship were the seniors, always. I guess the ones who were a little bit more mature. But I wasn't really enjoying it, but still saw a lot of kids grow up and be discipled and got to be a part of their lives and their journeys, and so that was cool. Many of them I'm still involved with today. But I found out very quickly that student ministry was not for me.
The church that you grew up in, sort of describe what a typical worship service looked like and sounded like.
Yeah, it was fairly traditional in the sense that 6 or 7 hymns. At the time, there was no the words should be up on the screen. There was none of that, so it was grab a hymnal, turn to page 435. Pretty announcement heavy in terms of, this is going on and this is going on, and much of it, didn't relate to everybody in the church, and so it was kind of, tuned out. Expository preaching, good sermons. but a lot of things that you're used to: carpet, pews, the hardback pews. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Well, and for you, if you hadn't quite figured out, David is now 30, which puts him somewhat behind us, and that sort of frames historically. This is 2021, so you sort of do the math, figure exactly when that was, and what church life was like for the rest of us in that season. So given the fact that you figured out that student ministry was either a calling or a curse, and for you it wasn't a calling, and so your call was to preach or to pastor. So what led you into the church planting idea?
Well, originally, I set my sails to move here. I'm from a little town called North Augusta. That's where I'm from, North Augusta, and I was on staff at First Baptist North Augusta. Well, I had some friends, and some mutual friends that had moved here to plant a church. Now, at the time, I didn't know what planting a church was. I didn't know what it meant. We had many church plants, or so-called church plants, back home, but really they were just church splits. People get mad at each other and leave and go plant another church on down the road. But once they started, and just hearing some things, hearing stories about what they were doing, their creativity, their intentionality about lostness, some of the things that they were doing, even that I never knew was a possibility within the church. You know, I'd always been kind of led to believe that it has to be a certain way, and really, kind of, you know, as I wrestled through that, and again, like to go back a little bit, I don't mean anything about the church that I grew up in. I don't mean any of that derogatorily or in a negative sense. I grew up to love that, and I loved being at church on Sunday. But sometimes we get led to believe that things have to be a certain way, and they're not even biblical. So whenever I came to the new church plant, we're doing things, and I come to the realization that the Bible is very clear about some things, and worship, and ministry, and evangelism, and there's some freedom, a lot of freedom in other things. So I came to be a part of their team, and I started out as a church planting resident, and I worked a lot with the setup and tear down, worked a lot with a lot of their systems, really, and getting connected with their first-time guests, was given some freedom to be a part of some of their new community groups, what they call missional communities, getting those launched and up off the ground. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with everything that they were doing. And it quickly led to, I think this is what God's calling us to do.
Okay. All right. So how did you settle on the specific area? We're now in Goose Creek, South Carolina. So how did you settle on this area specifically?
Yeah, so the first part of that answer, I'll answer with, my wife got a job at Goose Creek Public Library, and she had been working there since the beginning of our time here, which was in 2014. And so she's working there. She's seeing the clientele, folks who come in. It's not your average library. You know, I don't know when the last time you visited the public library last month, but they probably have 500 or 600 people come a day, and you know, on a high traffic day. And these are folks that needing to borrow computers, needing to borrow internet, looking for resources, things like that. So she's seeing the clientele that comes in, the brokenness in a lot of situations. And so her heart was already softened towards this area. Now, going back, we were at Church of Cane Bay, and you know, I told our pastor, senior pastor there, the church planter there, I told him, I said, look, I think this is what God's calling us to do. And he encouraged us early on in the journey to just pray about going to visit some other churches. But eventually, it led to a conversation where he said, you know, hey, we believe that God's called us to be a church that plants other churches, and you know that. And so we've always wanted to plant in this big city, Goose Creek, because of just the population. And as we started looking at the lostness here in the area, it changed from this is something I think we should do to God's calling us to do that, and there's nothing that we can do next without having done that. And because my wife's heart was already softened towards this area, it was just very clear. At the time, and it's probably very similar now, but at the time, it's somewhere close to 30%. 30% of people are only even religious in this city. So 70% of the city is irreligious. And then from there, if you break it down, if 30% are only even religious, how many of them actually truly follow Christ? And so we knew that this is what God was calling us to do.
So when you started as a plant from that church, was there a core group of people that came alongside of you as a part of that venture?
Yes, there were. We had freedom to take anybody that we wanted. But the way that it worked out was that we took anybody who lived in Goose Creek. And so I had built a relationship with them enough to where they liked me and knew me. And we had even started doing some stuff together because I lived closer on this side of things. And we started serving together in some areas. And we ended up taking somewhere right close to about 8 to 10 families with us from Church at Cane Bay. And yeah, it was a good group. It was a ragtag bunch. But we took most of the folks there from Cane Bay, yeah.
So what was your first challenge when you had decided you were going to do this? You had a group to do this. What was challenge number one in launching your church plant?
That's a great question. The first challenge for me was finding personnel. Because if you've noticed from a lot of church plants, if you want to do it well, you get a team together, and a good team. And Church of Cane Bay did that. Journey Church did that well. Will had Clay, and Charlie had Joel. So I wanted that person. But for me, my interests were even further because I wanted somebody to know that. Wanted somebody that I could lean on and trust in, somebody that I knew was in it just as deep as I was. But being 26 years old and planting a church in a very traditional city, I felt like I needed somebody a little bit older to bring some credibility. And I felt, because I'm a little bit more administratively wired, that it would be great to have a shepherd, somebody who really loved people and could be the life of the party, that type of personality. And so I just went on the search to try and find that person. And we did. We found that guy, but he had some health issues, some health concerns, and it didn't materialize. And so finding somebody to really press into this thing with me was always the biggest challenge in the early days.
You had to find a place to meet. So how did you decide where that was going to be, and tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so we met in an elementary school for our first 2 years. We met at Devon Forest Elementary School. And great relationship throughout the entire history. As a matter of fact, we haven't been meeting there the last 2 years, and we still serve them. And still, matter of fact, yesterday I got the picture that, we had taken donuts to all the staff and so forth. But initially, it started out with just a cold call of not, hey, can we borrow your building, but hey, can we come and love on your staff and love on your teachers? And so for 2 years, I believe, 2 to 3 years, we were serving on them and loving them and bringing donuts, doing lunch buddies, doing big movie nights out in the community, free for everybody. And we did that, I think, for about 2 years. Now, obviously, there was an end goal in mind, but they needed to know, and they still know, that it's more about the opportunity and the love that we want to show them. And so we served them about 2 years, and then whenever we made the ask, they were perfectly fine. They knew us, they trusted us, and they loved us.
Now, in your quest, evidently, as all church planters, they're wanting a permanent location, because going in and setting up and tearing down every weekend, while it's a labor of love, it's still a labor, and sometimes the laborers are fewer. So tell us a little bit about that journey from that arrangement to where we've ended up now.
Church planting and particularly set up and tear down one of those challenges is brutal. You know, a lot of churches, they look back on those days as the glory days, and they say, whenever we stopped, set up, and tear down, it left this giant hole, and it left this camaraderie. We don't have the same. I don't feel that way at all. I don't care what it brought our church. I don't miss it at all. Yeah, and so, listen, I'll just be honest. The first 2 years were really hard. They were really tough. The first, I guess, 2 years. They were really difficult being at the school. Again, traditional city. Anything new, they really look skeptically at anything new. And so it takes a lot of infrastructure, a lot of stability to be able to come in and do well. And so we knew that we needed some type of permanent location for the credibility. We knew that we needed that so that people who have been here their whole lives would know that we're not a flash in the pan. This is something that you can invest in. I am a young leader, but I'm not moving tomorrow. So we knew that we needed something, but we also knew that a lot of guys don't wait on the Lord in that. They jump out and venture out on their own, and they end up getting burned. And they end up trying to buy something they can't afford, or they make some radical decisions that are against their vision, and so the Lord doesn't honor that. And so we knew that we needed something, but at the same time we knew that it had to be from God to provide that. So I'll back up in saying that before we started even having services, way back early on, I bought a house here in the city to be planted in the city, to plant our lives, to be on mission at the grocery store and so forth. We were here, and every day, really, I would pass by this church. That was a golf ball's throw away from the house. I'd pass by it, and I just keep my eye on things, and I became a friend of the pastor here, and would check in from time to time, and no more than that, really. But as I drove by, I would check in on things to see, are there cars in the parking lot? On Sunday mornings, is anybody there? Kind of a thing. Just curious. And last year, whenever I think at the beginning of 2020, my office lease came up at my house. I'm sorry, not at my house, but at my office space. My office lease came up. And I took a wild guess and a wild request, and I asked the pastor here if I could have a room to office out of. At the time, our son was about 6 months old, and so I needed a place to office, get out of the house, and I didn't want to spend the money anymore. And they agreed to it. They gave me a little office space, and I told them that, hey, this will be somebody will be here throughout the week, and I'll keep an eye on the building, and I'll be here, sort of thing. If you need anything, don't hesitate to let me know. Well, I got my foot in the door to deeper relationship, and so I'd be here Monday through Friday or whatever, doing sermon prep and all the admin stuff, and I'd walk around the building, and if anything need fixing, we'd go and fix, and from time to time, if a member needed something, we'd reach out and go help in that area. And then the pandemic hit, and so everything started to really heat up at that point. We were without a meeting space at that point, and March 15th, I believe, 2020, we were officially without a meeting space, didn't know what we were going to do, didn't know if the school would ever let us back in. I don't even know if they would let us in today. Anyway, and so just really started to pray, really started to pray about a meeting space, some type of permanent location. And so I did the only thing I knew to do, and that was to prayer walk around this building. So Monday through Friday, I'm here and officing. In my lunch break, I would just go and prayer walk around the building and walk. And I got to the point where I asked the Lord, God, if this be something that you want to do, with merging these two churches, with us being able to meet here, or even having the opportunity to meet here on Sundays, God, I'm just going to ask, would you let them come to us? Let them be the ones who ask. I don't want to be perceived as the young hotshot trying to take over. I don't want to be perceived as anything than a humble servant who's just looking for a place to meet. And so they graciously asked us and said, hey, if you need a place to meet, your church can meet here. They came to us and did that on their own accord. And a few weeks later, after that, has to be a Holy Spirit thing, but I was getting ready to walk home for lunch one afternoon, and something told me, has to be the Holy Spirit, go see if anybody else is over on the other side of the building. And so I'm walking, and I walk over, and the former pastor is here, and of all things, he's working on the toilet. He's working hard, and we just start having conversation, and he looks at me and he asks, what do you think about merging the two churches? And I answered a prayer, right?
All right, well, before you proceed, I'm going to back up a little bit and then come back up to this point, because I don't know if it was 2018 or 2019, sort of gets away from me, that after I had visited with y'all at the school, worshiped with you on a couple occasions, and understood your location to this facility, your desire, those kind of things, that I actually came and worshiped with them and met the pastor. And then he and I met to have lunch because I was curious to know what was going on in his life. And I learned that he had an associate here, that he had retired once, and the assumption was that his associate would assume the position as lead pastor. It didn't work out. He had to come out of retirement and assume that once again. And his wife knew it was time for him to retire. She was wanting him to do that. And that was the last that I heard, because I didn't hear a follow-up contact with him in respect to that, but I knew that it was in his mind and his heart. We didn't really talk about you because I didn't want to interfere in the process that God was up to. So that's a little background to my relationship with David and my desire, and of course the ministry that God has called us to. And so when you came in here because of COVID, what was your meeting schedule?
I think, if my memory serves me correctly, they continued to meet at 10, and we met at 11:30.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we met at 11:30. And so many of their folks were just interested in us, and they would stay over for the late service and hang out. So, yeah.
So when he approached you that day and asked about a merger, did he indicate that this was a conversation that he had had with any of the leadership in the church? Was this just something in his mind that he wanted to explore with you first before proceeding with that conversation in this context?
Yeah, that's what it was. And before we get into anything, he's an incredible man of God, loves the Lord, loves his people, and loves his church. That's the way that it started. He wanted to gauge my level of interest first, and from there, I think he knew that he could trust me, and we had enough rapport. We had spent enough time together over the several months in between that there was a relationship there. So he wanted to gauge my level of interest first, and then he took it back to his leadership team. I actually think his wife knew that the conversation was coming with me, but she didn't know it was happening on that day. And so she said, "You did what?" And of course she was okay with it, but initially she didn't know it was happening. Yeah.
Give us a timeline, a breakdown. So he took it back to the church. They talked about it. At what point did you share with your church that this was a conversation that was going on, or were you waiting until there was a response and some sort of idea about what lie ahead?
Yeah. So they operated on leadership council, so they had a lot of voices speaking into the process. Sunday school directors, VBS directors, a lot of people speaking in the process. I think somewhere up to like 15. And I think our initial conversation was back in May or June of 2020. And he, like I said, he'd been wanting to retire, and they wanted to honor him. They may not have even necessarily agreed with the best decision. I don't think any of them regret it by any means now. But initially, they don't know. They don't know me. They don't know our church and how it's going to impact them. And so they just knew that they loved him and they wanted to honor him. And they knew that they wanted to see the church still alive. And so, the first conversation was, hey, here's a possibility. The church planner is interested in it. What do you guys think? Should we proceed with this further? So it was just a very preliminary thing. Well, the next conversation is a little bit more serious. We're going to actually vote on this to proceed conversations with the church and the church plan. And that happened, came forward. Well, now we're really getting into the grunt of it, the real bristle of it. I think we're maybe 2 months in at this point. Well, what is it going to require? What will we require? What are the terms of the merger and so forth? And there were some things that were really important for us that I felt like we had to bring with us in order for us to maintain our identity. And so there were some things that we had to bring to the table. And where it got really tricky was I felt like we needed to bring our team. And so at that point, you're asking these folks to vote themselves out of jobs and out of positions. And from there, everybody was still smooth sailing.
Okay, for clarification's sake, for those who've not been on this journey, and some of us have, were these separate conversations that were taking places with a group, or were there points in there where you stood before their people, you preached, you answered questions about those issues, or were these entirely separate sort of negotiations and conversations that were going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of that was all them, and the former pastor was facilitating those conversations. I will say that we had a mediator in this whole arrangement that was brought in, and that was our director of missions, whom you know, and he was brought in to help mediate some of those conversations. So I never stood before them. I never once. Now they knew me, and I would honestly say that was for the better. Not that I think that I could have messed things up or anything like that, but somebody was able to not just say, which their former pastor was saying, here's a church plant that I think we can merge with. The DOM was able to come in and say, here are the brutal facts, and here's why I think you should. And both of those pieces were vital to the process. Put me over here, and everybody else is looking internally as to, in-house things, why or why not we should, change directions, change course. And so I think internally they dealt with a lot of that, and then over here we were able to be brought in a little bit later into the process.
From the day working on the toilet, when the pastor raised the issue, to where they worked through their process, their procedures, their constitution bylaws issues, to the place where as a church they were going to either vote up or down on doing this. How much time between those two had elapsed?
4 months. The fastest merger in history. We were going so fast that I was kind of like, hey buddy, let's slow this thing down. But we weren't in the driver's seat, obviously, the former pastor was. And he knew his people well enough to know we need to get this done. And he was right.
How much, and this is purely a guess on your part, a best guess on your part, is the fact that the pastor had been here a long time. He had the complete trust of the people. He was invested in their lives. They were invested in his life. How important was it for his leading them to this to assist them in making that otherwise very difficult decision?
I had everything to do with it. Without him, it wouldn't have happened. Okay. Yep.
How many people, did they do it as a secret ballot, or do you know how they managed the vote?
For their leadership team?
Well, to do the merger, yeah.
It was a standing vote. For the whole church, it was a standing vote. Everybody had to stand because we wanted to be able to put that on paper and be able to send that to, for all the legal ramifications. So it was a standing vote, and it was unanimous. I think they had 65 people that day, and it was all unanimous.
From that moment that they voted, what was the next step beyond that in terms of what you did?
Yeah, so I started with their, and I'll even back up. Before that, I was here at every service. From the moment we started doing services together, I was here at every Sunday morning service. And from that, I would start getting invited to go and do stuff. There was a graduation party I went to, just being around their people and letting them get to know me and let them know I was no harm. And, and I would say that genuinely it was not a charade or some type of politic for me, but it was genuinely loving and caring for those people. And so they knew that. And so when we merged, they're my people now, And so I set up a list or an Excel spreadsheet for all their leadership team, and one by one, I went to their homes or met here or met somewhere and just got to know them and heard their story and interviewed them in that way.
From the time of the vote until now, how long has it been? A year?
It's been a year and a month.
A year and a month.
Yep, a year and a month to the day.
Okay.
Yeah, August 23rd of 2020.
And at that point, a part of that change was to change the name, to change the identity, to change the corporate identity. Okay, all in paperwork. So out of that 60-something people that were there for the standing vote that day, how many of them have continued the journey for this year?
Every one of them.
Every one of them.
Yeah, no joke. Every single one of them has stayed on, and I'm sure that they don't like a lot of the things that we do, but they have stuck with it, and they've stuck with us, and they're all, as far as I know, as the moment of this recording, they're still here. They're still with us.
So have you received in either personal conversations or hearing secondary, the sidewalk committee meetings that take place at every church, have you heard any pushback or questions or challenges that have come out during this year?
Yeah, every now and then you hear some questions about things, mostly encouragement, mostly good things. They're appreciative of the changes. Our biggest obstacle, I think, was moving from Sunday school to community groups. And that really wasn't even it's not that they had a problem with community groups, it was semantics. It was semantics, and it was all language for them. Because we have groups that meet on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. in the fellowship hall. And so for them, it was just, I don't know if I can do that. But once they go and they experience it, they like it and they love it and they want to be a part of it. And that's happened for most everything. Most every complaint is, for something they don't understand. And so we try to communicate those things and over-communicate those things and just be as clear as possible. But even then, just like you and me, we need to experience it. So when other people experience it, and as soon as that happens, they seem to be on board.
At the point of the merger, what were your numbers in terms of the people attending Creekside?
I think we were 50, 55, somewhere averaging on every Sunday. So,
and they were 60-something?
60, 65, somewhere in that ballpark.
Since that time, what are the collective numbers of people in attendance?
I had ventured to guess about 160, probably 160, so I'm doing the math in my head. I'd say that we've gained probably 30 to 40 people in the last year. Obviously COVID's presented some challenges, but in the last year I would say that we've probably gained somewhere close to about 30 to 40.
Looking back, this is a very compressed journey. We know this in church life. to take an establishment like the one that was here, to go through that much change in that brief time is a proof that miracles still happen. Absolutely. So in hindsight, over this compressed schedule, is there anything that you would do differently?
That's a great question. You know, our membership process, I felt like coming into this was really good. I think that was one of the things that in reading our bylaws, I think that there was a lot of confusion about. And so for the last year, our membership process has been kind of muddied because we eliminated some things to make people feel more comfortable. I probably would have stuck with some of those things, but at the time it kind of felt like it was a hill that we were going to die on. And so we eliminated some, because we do covenants, annual covenants. And, some other folks thought it was a contract. Why are we bringing the world into the church? And we didn't have enough time to really explain it, to model it. We just said, okay, we'll do away with it. And so now, on the other side of it, we're able to bring those things back. Obviously, we're able to bring it back. Over and over again, it was this learning process as we went along. And so there were times where I stood up in front of their church with the permission of their pastor to say, hey, I hear, I'll give you an example about the name. We didn't really have much of a conversation about the name, but there towards the end, it was like it was really going to be, it could have been a hill that we were going to die on. So I stood up in front of their whole church and I said, hey, if the name's going to stop us from being one big family, let's sit down together and let's talk about it, and let's really discuss this. And we did, and it was the fastest meeting of my life. We determined that it was the best decision, and that's their folks. And so I was able to learn as we went. I was able to back off some things, but really, even the membership thing is really small in comparison to everything.
Right. And this is to help others who may be watching this, or churches or young church planters trying to figure out how to do this. So to be clear, the people who were members of this church when they agreed to this merger, that they weren't grandfathered in as members of Creekside, correct?
Initially, no, that was not the way. But they just wanted to be grandfathered in. They wanted to be grandfathered in to just be members, and so that's what we said. If you want to be, initially we had them going through our membership class. Hey, 3 weeks, and they said, again, language, semantics. They said, we don't need a class to be saved. And so obviously we knew that was something that we could get to. Let's sign the dotted line, let's merge, and then we could come back to that. And they don't even know it, but I preached through the membership class the first month of our existence. I just preached through it, and it was fine, and nobody had anything to say. But again, there were some things we backed off on. There were some things that, hey, this is where we're not budgeting, and those were the things that were important to us, and that was our vision. It had to be our vision, had to be community groups over Sunday school. Again, not because there's anything wrong with Sunday school, but for our mission and for what we do, it has to be something that's a little bit more mobilizing than that. I grew up on Sunday school, know the Bible because of Sunday school, so there's no problem with that. Our team, our staff had to be those things. So our bylaws had to be our bylaws, and really just our philosophy of doing things. Elders, being elder-led, the real important stuff that makes us who we are. Everything else I felt like was a little bit more, second tier.
So some nuts and bolts things. It may be simple because I've had conversations with other churches in the area who've gone through a church planter has partnered with an existing church, came in, was able to take possession of the property and to pick up ministry from there, and then to start investing in the building that needed some upgrades. But they inherited without really knowing it, some debt. And so they had to deal with that. So did you inherit any of that with this property, this facility, or was this clear?
Clear debt. Yeah, it was a clear title, no debt. We had some renovations, obviously, and we knew that it was going to be a pretty significant amount of money, but no debt.
And the next question is one that comes out of personal experience, because I know what can happen, so I'm curious to know about your journey here, that quite often in the church planning's life cycle, the struggling years are really growth years because people are struggling for something moving forward. But then when they finally move into a permanent location, it's like they drop their guard and they quit pulling as hard at the oars because it's easier to do. What is your take on, Creekside in terms of transitioning from a church that was mobile to a church that now has property and a location, in terms of the people's commitment to the future and continue to reach folks?
Eye of the tiger, right? You gotta have the eye of the tiger. For me, it's always been seeing this as not the end. This is just the beginning. This is just a tool for us to be able to actually start doing what God's called us to do. I understand that sentiment, but for me, the early years were the hard years in terms of everything else. Not having a meeting space, not having an office space, that was so much harder than this, and so for me, I realized that all of that vision casting, the urgency, that happens with me. And if I cease to beat that drum, then we will get relaxed and we will settle. But, like I said, and the way that I feel is that, of course, we've got some things that we've got to take care of here. We've got some things we really got to do in terms of renovation and getting something that's worthy enough to invite people into. But for the most part, I'm mostly excited because the setup and teardown days are behind me. The having to fundraise days are behind me. And now we actually have time to focus on the vision and focus on the mission. And so, for me, it's like it hasn't distracted from the vision. It's enhanced the vision.
And out of the people that have come in since this all happened, how many of those have been church people that were looking for a church home, and how many of those have been a part of the connection in the community and the unchurched, which is the object and the purpose for existing? Yeah. How would those numbers break out?
That's a good question. We do have, we just had the privilege of baptizing this week from our city. Some business owners here from the city. We had the privilege of walking with them through that journey and seeing them cross the line of faith and being baptized. In answer to your question, much of it has been some transfer, but I would say mostly de-churched, honestly. That's been what most of our growth has been. They haven't been a church in a long time, and maybe they've lived here, but it's just a totally different city and a totally different thing in the city from what they're used to. And so it's been fresh, it's been encouraging to them. We're starting to see, believe it or not, a lot of the grandkids and kids from the established generation that was here. We're starting to see their kids and grandkids come back. And that was cool. This past Sunday, we also had the privilege of baptizing a granddaughter of somebody who used to go to that church. And they're coming back because they like what they're seeing.
That's cool stuff. So I haven't been watching the clock. I was going to, but then we had some issues here working through that. So is there any question that I haven't asked you that you would love to answer in this context?
Well, I would say that based upon the people that could or will watch this, if it's anybody that's interested in going to merge a church or to do an existing church, it's humility, relationships, character. Those things really matter. Patience, it really matters. We weren't the first church that came here. we weren't the first church that had that type of relationship here. There was another one that came by, had his chest poked out, was really arrogant. They were guests in this building. They had no right to be here even. But it felt more of like a takeover, in that regard. I don't even know if merging was in his mind. But that's the way it felt like to them. And so for me, it was just, I want to get to know you. I want to love you. If you don't have any interest in pastoring and shepherding and discipling the people that you're about to take on, then don't do it. Because that's what you're asking for. In every situation, is not the same. There might be people who want to leave, but at the end of the day, we're talking about real people, and you having your space is important, but go about it the right way.
Well, to show that even though we're not quite 30 years apart, close, not quite 30 years apart, how much kindred spirits we really are. In the fact that one of my last things was going to be to say, look at that camera right over there, and say to a church planter who's wanting to do this what you would recommend for them. I didn't have to give you that instruction. So I'll follow up to that, say to look at that camera and speak to the church or the pastor who's been faithful stewarding the kingdom of God assets in terms of property and location and community and relationships. And what would you say to that church and his people about this kind of journey and how to be open and receptive to have those kind of conversations, so that when you're done, when God's time for you is finished, there is something that lives on that's a testament to the faithfulness of God through you? What would you say to them? Look at that camera and say.
I would say, one, I think there was not a person in the existing church that was not antsy or hesitant. They didn't take it lightly. And kudos to them, right? But they found a young pastor with a young family who they could trust, who knew that he knew that the young pastor was going to just brush them off to the side, who was going to give them an opportunity to speak. So look for that guy. Look for the humble guy. Look for the guy who's going to be able to listen to you and hear your heart's desire. He may not always agree with you. He may not do it the way that you want him to do it or the way that is familiar to you, but at least he'll listen to you. And secondly, I would say that if your church is not a place that your grandchildren or even your children would want to come to, I would say that it can be a reality. It can be a reality where you all go to church together. Because that's what we're seeing here. You can all go to church together and be in the same place and worshiping together. Matter of fact, I just had the conversation with someone the other day. We brought in all of our young kids into this building. They're running all over the place, and our older folks are tripping on them and being loud and messy. And I asked one of the old ladies, I said, you don't mind having all these kids in your building? And she said, no, absolutely not. They are the future of this church. And so I would just say, it's an exciting place. It's an exciting time. They look for somebody who cares about the community and somebody who's going to care enough about you, your kids and your grandkids, and God can do the unthinkable. God can do it all.
All right. Well, I'm James Pope. And this is Church Rebirth Ministries, and this is what God has called me to do, to help churches and church planters along the way come together for a common purpose in advancing the kingdom. And so it's been my privilege to spend this time with David Barton. We thank you for joining us. I'd like to hear from you. If you'd like to be able to reach out to him and have a greater conversation, then let me know, and I'll make sure that connection takes place. But thank you for spending this time with us today. God bless you.